coffee cup goes everywhere I go, especially in the morning. So as long as I've got coffee, I'm good. But once the coffee disappears, it's a whole different day. I don't want to just bore everybody, half of you guys, because half of you already have me in classes. But for those that don't know me, I'm Eric Peterson. I retired out of the Bartlesville Police Department here. Served about 23 years, and I've been in a lot of different capacities. I've been a training officer, I've been a firearms instructor, I've been a division commander, I've been on our special operations team. I was a sniper for half the team the time I was there. I was on entry team the other half of the time I was there. I've worked the field, I've worked in criminal investigations in the department, I've done just a little bit of everything. So it's a wide and varied. I worked with the Crime Stoppers unit here for the last couple of years, and coordinated that for several years as well. So a little bit of here, there, and everything. So I've been trying to think about, so that's where I come from. I retired out of that to take the job here to work with the criminal justice program here for Oklahoma Wesleyan. So it's been an experience, it's been a lot of fun, I'm really enjoying it, and so to be here today in front of you all is a privilege, because I feel like whenever we can share what we've learned through the years to the next generation coming up, you're learning from our experience. Hopefully that gives you a head start, gives you a little bit better grasp on wherever you're going someday. So to me, it's a great privilege to be able to talk to you all here or in any of the other classes. So we're talking a little bit about social problems, and it was good to hear what you guys have been going through, because some of your information has overlapped with criminology, so they've actually kind of dovetailed together for those of you that are in the criminology class as well as this one. You know, there's a lot of different ways we can approach this. So I'm going to start. Does this one work?
Well, if it doesn't, I may have one then.
We'll see. Okay. Rule number 2, and besides the coffee, you can't laugh at my artwork, at least not out loud in front of me. Wait till later. That's all I ask. Okay, so we have justice. And on this side, we're trying to balance social order with freedom and liberty. Okay? Ideally, that's what the criminal justice system is supposed to do. If it's pure and if it's correct, that's what it's supposed to do. However, what we find is, as we look at different things and different people's opinions and how different people have interacted, some people will say this is the justice is actually dependent upon the haves and have-nots, or it depends on wealth versus poverty, or status or lack of. Get the idea? So it's kind of what we're talking about when we get into the social problems. Much of how you're going to view the criminal justice system and how it actually works is going to be dependent a lot about where you come from, to be real honest. So we'll start with what it's supposed to do. Would you all agree, and again, I don't want to double tap too much on what we've been talking about in other classes, but especially for you that aren't in the other classes, would you agree that we have to have a social order? I mean, would you agree? Could you imagine laws like if there were no driving laws? Okay, we have cars, we have roads, we have all the things we have, but if there was zero driving law.
Come on, you libertarians, be honest.
Okay, so how would that look to you? How would that look trying to go from here to, let's just say Walmart? How long do you think, or how safe would it be to get from here to Walmart? I mean, people be driving through yards. 5-year-olds might be behind the wheel. Whoever had the biggest tank for a car would probably be clearing the roadway, right? So we have to have some law, some order, because by giving up some freedom, everybody can live together. Everybody has more freedom. But you have to give up some to have some, right? So you have to drive a certain speed if you want to be able to have orderly movement on the roadways. You can imagine Tulsa if there was no traffic laws, okay? So that's that side. But the other side, we've got personal freedom. If we get too many laws, then we basically become a a government-controlled society, which that's equally bad. I mean, we can flip this scale either way. We can get so liberal that there's so many freedoms that everybody's rights get trampled on because everybody's free. The other side of it is we can get so many laws and so many constraints that literally we have no freedom left. On the flip side of the scale, we should have personal freedoms and liberty. Again, for those of you that aren't in the class with my other classes, what would you, where do we get, where does this come from? Why do we feel that we have this side of the balance? There's an important document that gives us that side of the balance. So let me try this one. Freedom of religion. Right? Constitution, but more, there you go. Bill of Rights. First 10 amendments. Technically the Bill of Rights, but it goes through 14 as far as here. But yeah, we got the Bill of Rights, and that's supposed to counterbalance the social order, social control. You are supposed to have the right to religious freedom, to bear arms, to have freedom of speech, to have freedom of press, to have security in your home against unreasonable search and seizure. Okay? That home should be a sacred place for you. And since I wander, you should be able to have freedom and liberty within your person, right? So we have the balance. Now, if we start looking at some of the things that seem to affect the justice system, now we start getting into perceptions and where the system doesn't work right, okay? For starters, I'd be the first one to tell you, I think we have a really good system comparatively to worldwide. But I would also be the first one to tell you it's not perfect. And I don't think it will ever be perfect. And if anybody can give me a quick answer, this ought to be a no-brainer. It's going to be so obvious when you hear the answer, you're going to be surprised you didn't answer it. But why will this system never be perfect? I would argue it won't even be really good. It'll be close, it'll be good, but it won't be really good. There's a reason for it. It's run by human beings, okay? And as long as human beings are involved, you're going to have problems. There's not a human being in the world that doesn't have their own agenda, some sort of selfish motive, some sort of ambition, some sort of drive, and all these things. And we're wired that way. We all have these in us. So the question comes, when you're putting people in charge of other people, who will monitor their ambitions and their drives, and who will operate with ethics and integrity, and who won't? Does that make sense? So as long as we have people in power that can be affected and influenced by these types of personal things, we will have an imperfect system. Now the other side of that is, obviously we would have to come up with some sort of mechanistic machinery that would be so totally impersonal, we might actually become unfair then, because we wouldn't have the ability to take individual circumstances into account. So, like, what would be an example? Well, let's just use speeding. I don't know, I don't remember your name, ma'am.
Emily.
Emily, okay, so Emily has been a perfect driver all her life. She's never got a speeding ticket, never gone over the speed limit, blah, 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 blah. Except this one particular night, something terrible wrong has gone bad in her life, and she takes off crying and all upset and tears off down the road at about Mach 2.1, only to be pulled over by the police, right? So if we were in a totally mechanistic system where there was no judgment and no discretion allowed, basically he would be obligated to write her the ticket for whatever speed she was over, even if it was 1 mile an hour over, because breaking the law when it's all black and white is breaking the law. So she gets a ticket, she has to pay the fine, and there is no adjustment for what she's gone through tonight, or the fact that she's been a good driver all her life. But if we have discretion in the system, if we have the human factor in here, we can bring discretion. We can say, you know what, this lady has no traffic record, she's had a bad night, I'm going to write her a warning, don't ever do this again, send her on her way. Is that fair to other people that got a ticket? Not necessarily, but is that keep the human factor in there where we can adjust for the people that that are deserving and honest? We can. So again, what we're saying is it's a double-edged sword. As long as we have the human factor in us, it leaves that discretionary in there, but it also has the flip side. When used incorrectly, it can be used for selfish motives and means, which makes the system unfair. So, what you guys were talking about earlier, some of the things with wealth, does wealth Does wealth tip this scale one side or the other? Yeah, there's times it does. You know, does the fact that somebody's in poverty flip this scale one side or the other? Yeah, it does. And I'll give you some examples here as we go. Does status or lack? Yeah, it does. But I would also argue with you guys that there are times and places it becomes more apparent than others. And what I'll say, let me try like this here. Coming from the police department, right? I'm going to back up. Who makes the laws? Who makes the laws that are enforced in this city or in this state or in this country? They come from a multitude of areas, but where do the laws come from? Government 101.
Class participation counts. Come on.
All right, Josh, I'm picking on you today, man.
The government?
Government. What part of the government? You got the judicial, you got the executive branch, you got the legislative branch. Absolutely. Congress. That's what Congress does. Congress passes laws at the federal level. How about state level? Government 102. All right, Josh, fix this, man.
I feel sad.
I don't want to tell you that it's the same answer for state as it was federal, because then it would sound like I'm prompting you, but
Yeah.
what's
Legislative.
Legislative, Congress, the state Congress. We have a state representative group that makes our laws. Yes, you do. Seriously, y'all, you have a federal level, you have Congress, okay? The Senate and the Congress, they make the laws. Okay, at the state level, you have a state Congress or a state body of some sort. They make laws. How about at the city level now? City has ordinances, right? We have federal laws, we have state laws, and then we have city laws. So city makes ordinances. Who do you think, because this one will probably be a little more complicated, who do you think makes the laws in a city? I'll let you off the hook. Usually city councils, mayors, things like that, okay? You usually have a city council, something like that, that passes laws. All right, the reason I bring this up, from a law enforcement point of view, as a law enforcement officer, I don't make a law one. I've never made a law in my life, okay? We don't. We're the enforcement arm. So Congress and all these groups, legislative bodies, they make the laws. I enforce the laws. They tell me what it's supposed to be. My job is to enforce it, okay? That's my job. The judicial side of it now, in the justice system, which is the courts, they decide through trials and hearings and things like that, did the police officer apply the law to the individual correctly? And that's where we get into the justice system now. We've got the laws, we've made the application, now we're in the court side, and then of course if there's a conviction, then we have the corrections part over here. So we go, but the reason I'm using stuff about the laws is, from a law enforcement point of view, it never crossed my mind about keeping people in power. It never crossed my mind about going after the poor people that didn't have the money. Those things never crossed my mind. I don't know too many officers that they do, quite honestly. But when you step back and you look at it from different perspectives, you can see how it would either appear that way or it actually works that way, even though you don't mean to. And let me give you an example. In Bartlesville, our city divides up into what we call 4 districts. And if you looked at the district, it would look like this. So you have east side, which is that one, is 4, east is 6. So here's highway, or here's the river. So we have a north quadrant here. Then we have a west quadrant, which is downtown. Actually, it's the downtown quadrant. And then over here we have what we call the west side, which is 107. That's our district, how we number our districts, by the way. So, I liked working 107. Okay, 7 was my favorite district to work. Okay, now the reason I bring this up is this is the east side of the river, this is downtown. 107s are basically our poorest area of town. It has most of our housing area, it's got most of our poor people, it's got everything that you associate with the poor side of town. Anybody want to guess why I like working over there?
This is a lot of crime.
Yeah. There's guns, there's dope, there's warrants. I mean, everything over there you can get into it. Over here, now here's the interesting part. Is there drugs and crime and guns on the east side of town? Sure there is. Sure there is. Problem is, over here, you don't see it very much. It's concealed much better. Much harder to find and harder to access from a law enforcement point of view. All right? Over here, there's a lot more of it, and it's a lot easier to get to it. So being the officer who wants to change the world and affect crime, and I want to catch bad guys. Well, where do I catch bad guys? I catch them right there, because they're the one that's dope and guns and warrants. It's out there, right? So this was my favorite place to work. Now, did I ever in my wildest dreams back then think about, you know, was I picking on poor people? Or was I picking on minorities? Or was I keeping the powerful in power while repressing the poor? Never crossed my mind. All I knew is if that dude had a gun, I wanted him. If he was selling dope, I wanted to chase him. So here's the interesting part though. When you look at it now from a sociological point of view, okay, we're going to step back out of the law enforcement side. So from my side, I wanted to get into stuff. That's all I want. I wanted to catch bad guys, take them to jail. I wanted in. And if I was taking dopers off the street, if I was taking gangbangers with guns, if I was taking burglars, you know, stealing cars and robbing liquor stores, I was doing my job and I was a happy camper. Okay, that's what I wanted to do. But when we step back now from a sociological perspective and problems that we're talking about, now we start looking about why is it that the dope and the guns and the gangs and these things, why are these things over here so much more prevalent than over here? Does that make sense? So what is the net effect of the enforcement strategy I was using? Right? Now I worked over here, don't get me wrong. If I found a gun over here, same thing happened. I'd take them to jail in a heartbeat if I had a good reason to take it. If I caught people with dope over here, great, you know. So it's not like I treated one side different than the other. It's just you might get one gun or one good dope bust a week over on this side, and I could probably pull one dope bust or a gun bust almost every day over here. There's, you know, there's a prevalent, there's just an easier prevalence. But as we look at it, why are those problems there? And that's where I think, you know, as you're looking at your social problems class, and as we're looking at this, as we try to figure out the criminal justice program, or the justice, how it's working, I think that's part of what we're looking at. And this is what we're talking about in criminology, is we're trying to understand the whys. I'm going to give you another example, and I don't want to dog track, you know, rabbit trail too terribly much, but let me give you an example of some of the things we see and how this comes to play. If you look at, don't quote me on the numbers because I don't have a book with me that I can look my numbers up, but I can give you the idea. So roughly, we'll say the United States population is roughly 60% white. It's about 25% black, and probably, we'll say 15% Hispanic right now, and maybe 5% other. Okay, give or take some numbers, but you get the idea, right? But if you look at the number of people that are actually arrested and the numbers of people that are actually in jail, yes, there's more white people arrested than any others because there's more white people out here. But if you were to do it on a per capita basis, in other words, how many white people are in jail? Let me do it this way. If all things were exactly equal, we should see our jail population. So if this is our population here, and this is our jail population, and say here's our arrest numbers over here, theoretically, if everything was exactly true and even and all people were exactly the same, we should see 65% of the population is white, 65% of our arrests should be white people, 65% of our jails should have white folks in it. There should be 25% black people arrested, 25% are incarcerated, 15%, you get the picture? If it was all exactly fair, but it doesn't work that way. What it actually would look like, and again, I'm just using this as an example to make the point, I'm not trying to make these exact numbers. What it might actually be is, out of all of our arrests, we'll say 40% are white, maybe 35, and we'll say that about 40% are black, and about 20% are Hispanic, and maybe only 1 to 3% are Asian Oriental comparatively. And when we go over to here, the arrest tends to carry more to the jail population. So now we're at about 35% here, 35% here, and about 25% here, and whatever's left over. Okay, this is called racial disparity. And what that means is the percentages of the numbers of arrests and the numbers going to jail don't match the percentages of the population. Okay, they're not representative. Now it can happen for several different reasons, but this is where it starts to concern people. Why is it that 65% of the whites only constitute 35% of the jail population? Why is it that when the population is only 25% black, why are they represented at 35 and 40% of our jail population? That's not right, right? So what people start looking at is, why are these numbers different? Are they discriminatory? Are they part of a social problem? Are they, and again, these are some of the things that we're covering in criminology, but it's also some of the things you're hearing a lot right now in the news, especially with, when we had the Trayvon Martin case here the last year. There's a lot of talk about whether the system is actually prejudiced, whether the cops are prejudiced, whether it's discriminatory, and all of that. So let's take this now, let's kind of sideline this for a minute, because now we're going to move back to the scales and back to this other one. Why are some of the reasons that happens? Okay, so let's go back over here. What do we know about poverty, guys? You guys are in social problems. Tell me about poverty or things that lead to crime. What types of things are involved in this? What creates poverty? We don't have to be, this doesn't have to be really deep. Just give me some quick,
Lack of resources.
Okay, lack of resources. So let's squeeze over here. So we got lack of money. What kinds of things are going to create lack of money there?
Job loss.
Okay, so no job. What else?
Education.
Lack of education. Good. What else?
It creates more crime. Is that what you're?
Well, we're trying to find out what creates the poverty area, and what types of things perpetuate that.
Okay.
Because then we're going to get to we're moving from this to what you just said in a minute.
Okay.
Where we're going to go from the poverty to why the crime a little bit. We're not going to get too terribly deep. Okay, so we got no job, lack of education. What else?
Generational influences.
Okay, absolutely. Can I use the term poverty mentality? Would that be all right for the purpose
Sure.
of where you're going with that?
Sure, no. We're doing building bridges this semester, so they actually have a lot of answers. They're just not saying them, I hope.
Okay, and we'll call this, we're just going to, for the purposes of here, I'm going to call it generational. Now you all know, by the way, why I do all your corrections on typed on one of your papers. I don't write well. So, okay. Anyway, yeah, poverty mentality, generational.
There's a lang. Go ahead.
Drug problem.
Drugs. So we're going to start getting in a debate here in a minute on cause and effect. And when we start looking at this, we can start balancing and playing around which causes which. Did the poverty cause the drugs, or did the drugs cause the poverty? Did the lack of education cause the poverty, or did the fact that they were poor mean that they have lack of education? And this is going to go round and round, okay? But this is some of the issues that you guys are learning about. It's also some of the major issues that we're fighting. So here's where I want to go with this. Real quickly, I want to address this real quick. Real simple little story that Bible story. Y'all know that Israel was slave to Egypt for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? Back in the days of Moses. Y'all heard the story about Moses and the Israelites fleeing Egypt, right? Yes? Okay,
Yes.
good. I got everybody's head but one, so it's cool. Okay, so now, how long were the Israelites in captivity, would you say? Or anybody want to take some guesses? This is not a quiz, I'm not gonna grade you, but, and I'm not a Bible scholar.
Two numbers come to my mind, 5 or 800.
Yeah, that's something what I'm hearing, that's what I'm thinking, hundreds of years, generations, okay? Generations. How long were they in the wilderness before they were able to become their own nation and enter the promised land? Do you remember off the top of your head on that one?
40.
40 years. Good shot.
Good
Would you
Bible
look, can
students.
anybody tell me, give me a guess, one reason why? I mean, this is one thing that I believe personally, but you can tell me, what would be a reason why Egypt or why Israel could not go and become an independent nation right away? Why is it that they couldn't just flee Egypt, go to the promised land, set up camp as a society, and be good to go?
They didn't know how, they've been enslaved for.
Exactly. Exactly. They didn't know how. They didn't know how to be anything but a slave. See, God got them out of Egypt in about 7 days or whatever that little spur was when Moses came along. But it took years, it took a generation. I mean, now we can also go back in, there was some disobedience involved and things like that. But there was a time you had to get Egypt out of Israel. They didn't know how to be anything but a slave. That's all they knew, right? So to learn how to be a competent, self-governing body takes time. Okay? Well, I would submit to you that, and especially in this particular point right here, on poverty mentality that's generational, I would submit to you that it's much the same thing. I've not grown up around really rich people like Donald Trump's or anything like that. So I don't know anything about Donald Trump or how he eats or anything. But I would submit to you that if I had to go, if he called me today and he was having a big formal dinner with all his rich people and Warren Buffett's and all these group, and they were having this super fancy big banquet, I'm not so sure I'd feel too comfortable. I'm not so sure I'd know how to act. I'm not so sure I'd know exactly where I'm supposed to sit or which fork I'm supposed to use, because they usually line up a whole bunch of forks off one side, you know. These spoons, one's here and one's over here, and I'm not sure which one's for which, right? I've never been exposed to that. I don't know how to operate in that group very well. And I can be the first to tell you it would make me really nervous. So what happens when you get people that have this type of mentality, they have no education or low, they've had no job, and now you're trying to pull them into a middle class? The jump from here to middle class is not much different than anything we're going to feel going from middle class trying to understand upper class.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's the same concept. It's the idea you've got to get them out. You've got to get Egypt out of Israel before Israel can come over here and be a nation. You've got to get the poverty mentality and the whole thinking and the whole process out of here before we can ever move a group as a whole into another area. Now again, sounds kind of, well, gee, if that's all we have to do, but that alone, I mean, in the Bible, under God's guidance, that took 40 years and a whole lot of desert, okay? In today's day and age, where you got the government and everybody and their grandmother thinking they know how to make this happen, I don't know how long it's going to take to do that. But here's what happens. So we have all these factors going on over here, and people that are in poverty, they tend to group in areas, right? Okay? So we're going to notice that when you have no job, you have very little resources. And by the way, another thing for lack of money up here, I'm going to put inheritance or legacy. Yeah, don't kill me on my spelling. All right? Again, I don't know any of y'all's social understandings here, but I'm going to assume somebody in here has probably got a mom or a dad that's got some money. And I mean money not necessarily like millionaire, but by the time they sell their house, they have their life insurance policy, they have whatever other properties might be. When it's all said and done and they die, they're probably going to leave you somewhere between $30,000 and $100,000 would not be uncommon for most middle American families to a kid. It depends how many kill. I mean, we're going on. But okay, an inheritance on the poor side of town doesn't exist. And most middle Americans and stuff, they know they'll go by and they'll buy their house, they'll get their job, and they'll increase that wealth. And when they leave their kids something, usually they'll try to leave a little bit more, you know, and it perpetuates. So there's a lot of indicators that go to the money side. But anyway, the lack of the funds, the lack of the education, the drugs, the poverty, those people tend to group together. Why would they group together? Now we're going to get a little more into a social context of a city.
Because that's all they have.
That's all they
That's
have.
their connections. We talked about that in our Building Bridges class, is that the
Yeah.
most important thing for poor people are their connections. That's all they have, the people that they know.
And that's why getting people to turn on each other
Mhm.
in the poor side of town, or to turn on their family. In other words, you know, Billy Bad Boy over here just robbed a store, but I know his mama, so I go and say, hey, where's Billy at? He robbed the store, and I know you know where he's at. She doesn't want to give him up. And but because those connections, those ties. On the east side of town, he's over there. You know?
Yeah.
They would. He's right over there with, you know, with his brother.
Even parents might, because they would
Mhm.
have a sense of social responsibility. You know, we can't have you disrespecting our family, acting that way, or can't have you hurting other people, making us look bad, that kind of thing.
The
Yeah.
whole thing. So yeah, it's a lot easier to turn people on the east side. Okay. So we also got to go back to the way a town progresses. Towns grow, towns die, and areas that were growth in one time will become a poverty area in another time. So like this 107 district actually used to be a pretty good middle class area back in the 50s and 60s. My wife actually had a house right off Virginia Avenue. Right now, in fact, the house where she grew up when she was a teenager, I've raided it twice on drug raids. And it's a piece of trash now, okay? But we drive by it once in a while and she'll say, I grew up, you know, till I was 5 or 6, I lived in that house right there. It's like, yeah, now you can't go in that yard without stepping on needles, but okay, you know? But it's kind of ironic, you know, the Jane Phillips edition down here and Oak Park up here, those were built very quickly as middle-class neighborhoods because Bartlesville was expanding with the oil booms real fast. And that goes back even further, that probably goes back into the 40s. But as the town grew, all the affluent people started building newer houses out on the east side, and now they're building more expensive, really nice houses down by Colonial, so the money in the town has shifted. Well, what happens to the houses that were over here? They get dilapidated, they get old, nobody wants to live there. So we get a few, you know, now the property values drop. So now the poor people all start, what's the term? We all come together.
I
Dream damaged here.
had it on the tip
okay,
of my
but
tongue until you got messed up, and then it messed me up.
Okay, but all the poor people, you know, the poor people start coming into this neighborhood because that's what they can afford. The gangland, the gangbangers, they start coming into this. The drug dealers come in because, you know, the drug dealers are not responsible people that are trying to put money in the bank and grow an empire of wealth and invest in housing and land. I mean, they're just out to turn a quick buck for the most part. I mean, around here. Now, there are those that are a little more business-minded, but we're not talking about that for this purpose. So when you put all the poor people into an area because that's what they can afford, now you have an poverty mentality. It starts to congregate in one area, and you start having more crime because you have people that have not trying to reach a means of having something. And believe it or not, what they have, they're very protective about. It's really interesting. There's a guy, I won't tell you his name because you can still see him on the west side. He's got a voice that sounds like a lady. Real high, and just talks real high. I had never met him before. I'm on working midnights. Has long hair, was wearing a big old bundled up jacket, comes over to my car and goes, Officer, someone stole my ham out of my refrigerator. And I'm looking at this man, I said, well, ma'am, I'm sorry to hear that. And first of all, I got scolded because he was not a she, so he promptly chewed me out for calling him a she. But I'll tell you what, he was furious. Now, he lived in this dumpy little house. I don't even think it had a door on the place. to be real honest. But he had gotten a ham from somebody for Christmas, and he was saving it for Christmas, and somebody came in and stole the ham. And I mean, you'd have thought they had killed his best friend. I mean, it was a big deal. So, you know, when you don't have much, what little bit you have matters a lot. But it's kind of an interesting paradigm, because then you also have the group that they don't care. They know they don't have a lot. They know what they have isn't nice per se, so why take care of it? So the yard goes to pot, you know, and then we also get into a factor of laziness. I mean, if you don't have to work for it, you don't have to maintain it, and why try? So we get into that as well. So we bring all this to bear, and we have crime. Crime rate goes up. Okay, drug crimes go up, violent crime goes up, theft goes up. I mean, they're stealing as much from each other over here as they're coming over and stealing here. I mean, it's not like the west side migrates over here, steals all the wealthy people's stuff, and goes back over to the west side with a big booty. They go across the tracks and a couple houses down, and they raid the next door, the drug dealer down the block, and they take some of his coke, or some of his meth, some of his cash, and maybe his gun, and then they hightail it home and try to sell it themselves. So we get the crime. Now, all of this being said to this effect, if I'm over here, you know, stalking the streets because I know I can get my hands on guns and dope, am I picking on the poor guys? You know, again, I'll go back to before. Never would have dawned on me that way. I would have never thought of it. I would have just thought I was being a good cop. There's a lot of crime. I get burglary calls, I get robbery calls, I get all kinds of calls on that. I'm doing my job, I'm going out and getting the crime. But when we start looking at the factors behind the crime, very quickly we can start to see why this disparity over here can also have come from the way police enforce laws, right? Because who typically, and again, I'm not trying to stereotype